Hello, this is BBC News with me, Nicholas Owen. We'll be taking a look at tomorrow morning's newspapers in a moment, but first, the time being just after 10:30, let's take a look at the headlines. Jeremy Corbyn says he takes his share of responsibility for his party's defeat by the Conservatives in the Copeland by-election. Speaking at the Scottish Labour conference, he urged the party to unite.
I've been elected twice to lead this party. I'm very proud and very honoured to lead this party. All my energies go into leading this party. All our party members' energies go in towards campaigning for this party.
Britain faces a sustained and serious level of terror threat from Islamist extremists. That's according to the independent reviewer of terrorism laws. Sir Mo Farah has reiterated that he is a clean athlete after a leaked report by the US anti-doping agency suggesting that his coach, Alberto Salazar, may have broken drug rules. In a further sign of worsening relations between President Trump and the media, Mr. Trump has announced he won't attend this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. Hello, welcome to our look ahead at what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow morning. With me are the journalists James Rampton and Martin Bentham, who's Home Affairs Editor of the London Evening Standard. Good evening to you both. Let's, before we talk to them, let's have a look at some of those front pages. The Metro leads with a story about 5 people who were injured when they were hit by a car in South London. The paper also marks this year's Oscars with a picture of the actress Emma Stone. The Times says the Scottish Government may be preparing to call a second independence referendum. It also features a photo of carnival goers in Venice yesterday. The Financial Times reports on the tensions between some American banks who employ thousands of people outside the US and the new president who's promised to bring jobs back to the country. The Express claims that millions of us will be forced to carry on working into our 80s following a warning from a former pensions minister. And Theresa May could put an end to free movement for new European Union migrants within weeks. That's according to the Daily Telegraph. The paper also features a photo of the British actress Naomi Harris ahead of the Oscars. Right, let's just begin our look at the papers. Let's start with the Times. Who's going to... James, would you get us on this story about the Scots to demand new referendum number 10? Fears a bit curious, this, because I thought this had sort of come and then gone away, and is it coming back?
Well, it's a ticking time bomb that's not going away, and senior figures within the government are saying the impact of Brexit on the UK's devolution settlement is the government's greatest concern at present. And the rumours are swirling that Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister in Scotland, is preparing to table another referendum when when Article 50 is triggered next month. If Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, rejects that, people are saying that could cause a constitutional crisis. So I do think that the state of the Union is one of the things that's very much in play here, and I would say is one of the disastrous consequences of Brexit, like the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, that hasn't been properly worked out by the UK government. And I fear this is going to lead to a lot of blood on the carpet.
Martin, I think the last opinion poll that I recall seeing about this still had quite a large majority of Scots against having a new referendum. I mean, does this mean the sands are shifting?
Not that we know of, and I think that the point about this is that Nicola Sturgeon obviously wants to hold this gun to Theresa May's head and has been doing all along. The reality is, I mean, of course it's a legitimate fear that number 10 will have, and of course it would be destabilising and so on if a vote was to take place. But the problem for Nicola Sturgeon is exactly what you just said. The opinion polls still indicate that the majority would be against. She certainly doesn't want to hold one if she thinks she's going to lose. And of course, some of the key things which stopped the Scottish people voting last time in favour of independence still remain, such as they wouldn't remain part of the European Union, even though Nicola Sturgeon went to Brussels not that long ago to try to strike some sort of deal. Well, that's a very uncertain prospect, and all the official position from Europe is that they wouldn't be part of the European Union, so they'd be outside it. And also, of course, they'd have to be part of the pound. They can't be part of the euro, although if they try to rejoin, it's problematic. And of course, if they had the pound, we would control their economic policy in this country, and their rate of exchange. So they're lost. So there's all sorts of complexities.
Well, it also echoes of the referendum in the first place, wasn't it? I noticed this also story. James Brackett's concerns about Northern Ireland as well. You mentioned the Irish thing, but apparently the Cabinet have been discussing that as well.
Well, yes. I mean, because there are going to be elections this Friday for Stormont, because you remember the government or the Assembly dissolved earlier this year over another crisis. And it just seems that there's this intense sense of disorder and chaos that's wreaking this nation at the moment, and the fact that there isn't a sitting government within Northern Ireland makes it all the more difficult. And the Republic come into play here as well, because that is the only land border that the UK has or will have with the EU has at the moment and will have after Brexit. So I do think these are incredibly difficult constitutional issues, and I do fear that the government does not have answers to them.
OK, right. Let's Good.
We'll talk about it later.
We'll be back on here in another hour's time.
Oh, yeah.
Carry on. Let's stay on the Times front page, though. There's another interesting story there. Martin, would you start us off on this? Tech giants must tackle cyberbullies or face curbs.
Well, I think this is an issue that concerns a lot of people, certainly parents with their children and adults as well, of course. That there's the story here is that it's administrators have summoned Facebook, Twitter, Apple and others to Whitehall to demand that they develop better ways of identifying people who are abusing, trolling other people on social media and basically making their lives unpleasant or worse, and trying to remove that content in the way that already they seek to do with extremist, terrorist material, paedophile material and so on. And of course there has been a concern that not enough has been done. There's lots of women have talked about this problem where they're getting lots of misogynistic abuse and so on. So I think it's an important issue here that the government is trying to put some pressure on some of these technology companies to try to address. And I think that's a good thing.
The technology company do say, I mean, they claim that they do work hard, and of course, if you're actually threatened with actual violence, of course, then it is a matter for the police. But it's
yes, I mean, it does
isn't it?
tie in with I've found quite shocking story that you featured earlier about the singer Lily Allen, who said she's come off Twitter because she was getting abused, if you can believe it, because she'd had a stillbirth. And I do, shocking is an overused word in journalism, but I do find it shocking that people could think that's a legitimate thing to do. What Diane Abbott said last week, I also found quite disturbing, was that, yes, you can block someone, but they can change their name and start abusing with the new name, and there's no way of tracing those people.
Part of the concern has always been, hasn't it, that actually it's up to the individual who's being persecuted and so on to raise that concern with the social media provider before they then do something. That's, I think, one of the criticisms that's been made, whether rightly or wrongly, and the idea behind this, I think, is that the company would proactively act to try to identify this stuff by, they identify word usage and so on and patterns of behaviour. They can do all that. As we know, they have a very close eye on what's going on, and so that's the idea behind this, I think.
Okay. Right, so, yes.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think the police could be more proactive as well. I know that they have prosecuted successfully the CPS. Some people like the vile anti-Semite who abused Luciana Berger, the Labour MP. So there are actions being taken, but I do feel like more should be done, because people who are at the eye of this storm are really suffering.
But some of it probably doesn't verge on the criminal. It just becomes it's not quite over that line necessarily, and that's part of the problem.
But it's
there's a lot
harassment.
There's a lot of well, that's a criminal offence potentially. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Okay, let's go on to the Financial Times. They've got a picture on the front page which older viewers and older presenters may be familiar with, which is Margaret Thatcher leaning out of a window with Norman Tebbit beside her, waving away. She just had an election victory. What's this story about? James, your turn, I think.
Well, I do believe that a certain presenter was there that night. It's a famous image.
I can't deny it. I
You're
was
too young, Nick. It was 1987,
like
the
this,
famous night where Mrs. Thatcher held up 3 fingers because it was her 3rd victory, and Norman Tebbit, her great ally, by her side. Now, one of the great ironies of this is that building was, when it was relinquished by the Tories, was given over to the EU and is now called Europe House. And one of the, for Tories, certainly bonuses of Brexit will be that they will try and buy that back. I mean, I think they are... there's a rich irony that Mrs. Thatcher was brought down by her antipathy towards Europe when she said no, no, no to Jacques Delors' proposal. So, if the Tories can get it back in their control, they'd be delighted, I'm
It
sure.
always seems slightly odd that the Tories are not in that building, because it was so associated
so
with the
iconic,
party.
isn't it?
Yes, indeed. One wonders about property values in that part of London, whether they can afford it, but of course maybe that's another...
Only the EU can afford it, perhaps.
Well, they're only just round the corner at the moment, so they're probably paying quite a lot for that anyway.
OK, let's go on to the Daily Express and a story. I think they mentioned it on their front page, but the details are inside. And it's a couple of familiar figures, I think we can say, Martin. They're Nigel Farage and Sir Donald Trump.
Well, exactly. It's Nigel Farage again with Donald Trump at a dinner, this time on Saturday night, last night. Yes, dinner with Donald. It's been captioned, been tweeted out, and it's Nigel Farage showing again what great friends he is. Not many people in this country are very keen on Donald Trump, but Nigel Farage certainly seems to be, and there he is, and right at the centre of it all.
Well, you say centre. I was interested in the table setting because he does seem a little bit far away.
Well, perhaps he's not central enough for his liking, but he's still quite
But
close.
he's still grinning like a Cheshire cat in that
Exactly.
photo. For me, that looks like the dinner party from hell, I must admit. And, for me, two of the most unpleasant people on the planet sitting at the same table. That is my view.
Very much your view. Yes.
Exactly. There will be many people who think, oh, that's great, Farage is making contact with Trump. But as a journalist, particularly at the moment, I feel, very angry with what the president's doing. He's excluded the BBC and the New York Times and Washington Post from press briefings. He's now, for the first time ever, a sitting US president is not going to go to the correspondents' dinner. And I just feel that there's this hostility towards the press that is undemocratic. And to make it worse, Farage is supporting him. He's saying the media are losing this battle big time. So I'm going to be annoyed about them, I'm sorry. But that is my view, I hasten to add.
Interesting. Within the story there, the pictures were posted on Twitter amid rumours that Theresa May is to increase her attempts to woo the president with an invitation to address the Tory conference in October. So it just seems to me that the president's much talked about visit seems to be slipping back, Martin.
Well, I'm not sure if this isn't a second one, maybe. I don't know, because
we're gonna get
the
two
first one
doses.
is meant to be potentially
lucky
in
us.
June, so maybe
maybe.
the second one, if that's correct. I'm not sure whether... It would seem unlikely he would come twice, but anyway,
But that would be a political visit, and the state visit would be, a sort of state-to-state
Yes, of course,
interchange.
I
wouldn't
see.
it?
They'd be separate. Of course, there'd be one visit, and then we will be another.
But you can't just slip a US president over here sort of casually for a quick sort of in and out for a Tory... I don't think.
I
Really.
hear
Seems
he's
quite
doing a
big
stand-up slot in a pub in Balham that night as well.
Right, OK. And now then, let's go on. Financial Times. Where's my financial... Yeah, Trump on television. Now, what's all this about? Who knows about this one?
Well, this is just a small story saying that he's
it's one of those small ones on the side, yeah.
Proving comedy gold on TV, that, of course, for his comic foes, as it points out here in the US, their ratings and revenues have been shooting up because, of course, he's quite easy to lampoon if you want to. And, it's fantastic. And, in fact, we had a great clip on your news bulletin earlier, didn't we, of the White House dinner from 2011 with Obama, who was obviously then the president, making fun of Donald Trump in the audience. Of course, trying to have a bit of comedy then. And the joke at the time was that Trump becoming president and converting the Trump White House. And you think, of course, that was meant to be funny, but actually it's now become a reality. So
I did read somewhere, James, that it was actually that sort of moment that when Donald Trump sitting there very unsmiling and fed up and
he was livid about that.
And actually it may have been the sort of moment when he thought, right, I'm going to go for the job.
But I would say that these satirical programmes are really working because Trump is so upset about them. When Saturday Night Live did its first brilliant impression of him by Alec Baldwin, he was tweeting during the programme saying this is a disgrace, failing Saturday Night Live as its ratings went through the roof. And then when Melissa McCarthy did an equally brilliant impersonation of Sean Spicer attacking journalists at a press briefing with the podium, picking up and Sean Spicer went, that's beyond me. You know that you're effective if your targets are complaining about it.
But OK, this is all, a lot of people all over the world think Donald Trump terrible and so on. But the fact remains his popularity generally among American voters, very, very low, I think record low for an income president, is standing among Republican supporters. Nobody's had it higher.
Of course, and that's why he's continuing the way that he is. And so, although, as a journalist, I agree about the media in a sense, on the other hand, that's been his strategy from the start. And I suppose he can argue that he communicates in his own way with the people he wants to communicate with, and we're some sort of corrupting influence in between, which obviously I don't think myself, but that's his stance. It's been quite effective for him, and it continues to be effective. Of course, it becomes worrying when it's based on misinformation and skewed alternative facts which aren't really facts and things like that.
I was interviewing earlier on a political scientist type in Washington who said, it's not a short step from this to suppression of the media in America.
No.
I mean, do we... this is getting extremist language now.
Well, I saw that interview and I was interested because it was Ornstein,
that's right,
wasn't he?
Yes,
he compared Trump, or said Trump had affinities with President Erdogan in Turkey, and I think he mentioned Sisi from
Egypt.
That may be an extreme comparison.
Those parallels seem a bit far-fetched.
They are looking. I mean, Turkey has more journalists
up,
locked up than any other nation in the world per capita. However, somebody who is so keen to exclude people who disagree with him, I think is pernicious.
But we can report still as journalists, can't we? And of course the BBC, for example, which has been excluded, will continue to report what's going on. And actually maybe rather than focusing on what they're briefing, you report on what's actually happening, which, the substance of it, and that way you can still hold people to account. So unless he goes down the road of some of those other people you've just been talking about who are locking people up, I think that it's a long way from suppression.
OK, very, very quickly, back to the Times again. Top of the page there. Martin, just tell us about this. Scrap use-by dates on milk to end the waste of 100 million pints.
Well, it's saying, which I must admit I already do anyway, he used a sort of sniff test on milk, and so you can drink it until such time as it starts to smell not very pleasant, or the white bits float when you put it into your tea.
You were telling me earlier about scraping mould off stuff.
Oh, yes, I'll eat anything. Of course.
But that's good.
It's good. Of course. The point is that people
this is not the government about to do something. It's just telling us we ought to be doing something pretty obvious.
It is quite shocking. We waste 100 million pints of milk a year because of the sell-by date. And we actually throw away 700 pounds of food a year, which is the equivalent of 500 meals. I mean, that in a nation and where lots of people are struggling, using food banks, and a world where many people are starving.